Welcome to Totally German Radio. Spike Eskin, how the hell have you been?
I'm great. How are you?
Look at this. Now, I'm in the driver's seat, and I'm going to get to interview you.
Yeah, wow. It's been how about that? I mean, I'm trying to remember. First time I talked to you, I must have been like 23, 13, 14 years ago, something like that. It's been a long time. Yeah. I remember you had like the VHS tapes of the concerts, right? Back in the day. Yeah. I could be wrong, but I could have sworn you gave me a Bret Michaels, Pam Anderson VHS too. Somebody did.
Yes, I did.
Dude, I remember it a long time ago.
Dude, it's funny because you emailed me that last week, and I was like, oh my God, because at that time, like, you lived over where I was delivering pizzas at. I used to deliver pizzas to you.
Oh yeah, was that when I was in Conshohocken?
Yeah. And I used to deliver pizzas to you late at night, and you'd be sitting there watching Howard Stern show, and we'd end up sitting there BSing for a while. And at that time, like, my daughter was just born. So a way to make money besides delivering pizzas was I was selling bootlegs on eBay, and I was making a fortune. So that's where I was getting, like, I had, and I still have to this day, like, now they're all in totes, but I had, like, 500 bootleg concerts, and I was becoming, like, this big thing. But then, like, eBay cracked down on it. But it was funny, like, I'd be selling, like, bootleg concerts and, like, from all the hair bands of yesterday, and then, like, the lead singer of Black and Blue would email me, like, please stop selling my concert because I'm trying to sell it and make money for myself.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. Even that whole market, like what the internet and YouTube has done to, that whole thing. I mean, I remember, in addition to the videos, I remember going to Repo Records and, spending like $25 or $30 on a Nirvana concert CD or something like that, and just the notion of doing that now, like I can imagine mentioning that to like somebody who's 18 or 20 years old now and spending, $25 on something that they could download for free or find for free somewhere is, it's crazy. Yeah, I lived in the Sherry Lake Apartments in Conshohocken, and I'll never.
Yep.
It's funny, like I was always like heavy dude, but like when you work late at night like I was doing, it's funny you mentioned like delivering pizzas late at night. Like all I would work until 2 a.m. and then eat until 4 a.m. and I wonder why I put on like 50 pounds after college. Like that was probably the recipe for it.
What's my excuse? You're right, real thin now.
I don't know, man. Yeah, I just snapped one day. I remember I went into to buy pants, and like I couldn't fit in any of the pants in the regular store, and I was like, to hell with this. Like it was just my fear of big and tall stores that made me lose weight. I was petrified of having to go into a big and tall store, so that's what happened to me.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I guess because as a kid, like I was always brought into the Husky department, so I was kind of used to it from being, you know what I mean? Like it's nothing like being like that 9-10-year-old kid with your mother and she's dragging you to the Husky department of J.C. Penney's,
Well, I had Husky too. I went through I think what happened was as soon as I hit like 13, that's when I put it all on, and then I got to college and I got a little taller. So it came off. I think the thing too was like my job, it was when people, I don't know, like it was a weird thing for me. I've never been, even today, and I like when people enjoy what I do, and that's cool. But like the notion of people, like strangers knowing who you are or people wanting pictures, it made me really, really self-conscious. And I think I got really self-conscious about all of it. And it was, in college I was fine. In high school, the high school is a time to be self-conscious anyway. But like the whole radio thing, I think was a contributor to it too. It's a weird it's a weird thing. Like the jobs I've done are strange. Like I never planned on any of it happening. So, you know, it's I don't know. It was always a weird thing for me for anybody to care who I was or, you know, want a picture or anything like that. And I was seeing, you know, like I would always do this thing when I was like in my early and mid 20s, like my hair would be blue or red or black or bleached, and like all I would do would see these pictures like with like this blue hair and this, like I was like, wow, fat guy, blue hair. I was like, or fat guy with red hair or black hair, and I was like, and my job is not to be like, you know, it's one thing if you're a wrestler and your job is to be a big dude, but like my job is to talk on the radio. Like I had no excuse. I had no reason to be, you know, the size that I was. So
now, going back to your job, I mean, how did you get started on radio? Is it something you always wanted to do, or was your father like an influence on you with this?
It must have like subconsciously been an influence. It wasn't something that I always wanted to do. I went to like when I went to college, I was a bad student in high school, and it wasn't until probably junior year when I decided that I sort of got scared of like high school ending and not having a plan. So I sort of got it together just so I could go to college, but I didn't really go to college with a plan, which was different for me because I went to public school until 8th grade, and then that's when I started to sort of mess up. So the parents sent me to a private school where everybody wanted to go to, like, you know, I went to USC my freshman year, and that was probably the worst school that anyone went to. I mean, it was like Stanford, Brown, like Harvard, and all that sort of stuff. So I was surrounded by people who were really into school, which I wasn't, but I got scared of not doing anything. So I got to college, and I was undeclared, and my final trimester or semester, I think it was semesters at USC, I took a journalism course, and I really liked it. So I transferred to Syracuse and got into their communication school, and I wanted to do sports, which I never wanted to do because of my father. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do sports, and that's what I went to school for. I went to school for broadcast journalism. But I sort of noticed that everybody at my college radio station that was into doing sports was either exactly the same, like the guy from, and this isn't a slight on him, but the guy that hosts NFL Red Zone, if you ever watch it, Scott, I forget what his name is, but he went to Syracuse, the Newhouse School. And they were all either like him, sort of like a prototypic, sportscaster, which I wasn't, or they were just like losers. Like I didn't want to be a part of it, and I started to not enjoy sports. And I ended up working at the music radio station in college and really enjoying that, hosting the morning show, and then eventually interning at WYSP. And when I graduated, I wanted to, I loved music radio. Like, I loved the idea of turning people on to new music, and I love the idea of, it was me, a lot of it, I love radio, I love communicating, but a lot of it was about sharing things, and whether it was sharing a memory, or sharing a song, that's pretty much what I got into it in the first place.
When you started leaning towards that, did your dad try to talk you out of it at all, or?
No, he never pushed me one way or the other. I mean, it was never like a follow in my footsteps sort of thing. He never asked me to. He never wanted me to. I mean, when I was younger, I would go to a lot of sporting events with him, and because I enjoyed it, and I think he enjoyed taking me. But he never. The only argument we ever had about my career was when I graduated college, and I knew I wanted to be on the air, and WYSP had offered me a job to be on the street team again, which I had already done when I was in college. And I didn't take it. And he asked me why I didn't take it. And I said, well, because if I go back as a street team member, I'll always be a street team member there. That's how they'll think of me, and that's not what I want to do. I want to be on the air. And I was, applying to, I applied to 40 different states and, 100 different stations. We got in an argument. He was like, you got to get your foot in the door. And I was like, well, my foot's already in the door, and blah, 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 blah. And what had happened was, while I was in college, I kept sending the program director of WYSP tapes of my college shows and asking for feedback. and I had never heard back from him, but he was always really impressed by it. And WYSP ended up promoting Matt and Huggy. Well, I actually applied for a weekend job at WYSP, which I didn't get. And then WYSP ended up promoting Matt and Huggy from late nights to regular nights, and they called me up one day and asked me if I wanted to try out in the middle of the night to get that late night shift, and ended up getting it. And, that's how the WYSP thing started.
So once you got on the WYSP, did you think to yourself, because WYSP was huge at that time, because Stern was still on in the mornings. I mean, they had the big lineup. They were known nationwide with a huge history. Did you think to yourself, like, I'm golden now, like I'm on a top national country?
I never, I didn't, my goal eventually was, I really loved programming, so I wanted to be the music director. That was my goal. And it all happened so quickly, I didn't really think, I've got it made. And it's not like, I'll tell you, man, when you're at the bottom rung of that, it's not like the money's great. And, I was on 5 times a week, and I was still part-time. So most of the time that I was on late night at WYSP, I had like a second job. Like I worked for a radio research company during the day for one period. I worked for FMQB, which is a radio trade magazine, during the day for a while. I worked for Lucky Beans for a little while. So it wasn't like, it never felt super glamorous. It was always really cool, and I loved doing it, but it never felt like I made it. And when I eventually, when our music director left and I eventually worked my way into getting that job, I actually had to take a pay cut to become music director. So it was and then, Free FM happened and so on and so forth. But, when we were big, when the Howard thing was happening, it was there were moments that were surreal, and it was pretty incredible how big WYSP was. But I was so young, and I was on late at night, and I didn't see people all the time, during the day. You're sort of separated when you're working that late at night. All I see was Rick Allen coming for the overnight and Stephen Huggy when I got there. So I think I was a little detached from it. But there were moments like, when Ozfest was a huge deal, and they had ended up booking a second date for Ozfest at Camden once, and it wasn't selling that great. And they ended up, sending me and my program director to San Bernardino to interview all the Ozfest bands to help promote Camden one. So here I am backstage, interviewing Sharon Osbourne in her trailer and Slipknot, and I'm 24 years old or whatever, 2 years out of school. It's things like that were a trip.
How intimidating is Sharon Osbourne in person?
She's really cool. It was amazing because she sort of got skinny out of nowhere. Nobody knew what was happening. And the last I had seen of Sharon Osbourne, I had seen her on the Stern E! show, fighting with ICP when she was still, big,
Right.
And they brought me to her trailer to meet her, and they opened up the door, and he was, she was tiny, and, she was, pretty, and she was so sweet. She was so nice to me. I was intimidated because I've always been, even though I feel like I'm a good interviewer, I'm always sort of nervous. And I think I get not intimidated in that it affects me, but I'm always sort of nervous. I was nervous going in there, but she was really cool. There was nothing intimidating about her.
Yeah, I mean, she's got it's probably the biggest set of balls in the music business. I mean, really.
Yeah, she was really tough. I've heard stories. I never saw it in person. And she was always pretty good to us with YSP. We had a good relationship with her. But yeah, I've heard some of the stories. I'm sure you've heard too. But yeah, she's pretty tough.
Now, it's funny too because you're saying how it's not that glamorous of a life. I have a friend who's a DJ in the local market right now, and he says the same thing. It's not what you would think. Radio is not. It's not a fun or really pretty job.
Well, I mean, look, I would say it's fun. I've had the time of my life, and mostly because I've been lucky enough to do the thing about radio people most of the time, the ones that end up making it, is that they end up making it because they can't imagine doing anything else with their time. In that I feel like I'm intelligent enough to work at another job, but I can't imagine doing something else, And it's not like I do radio constantly now, but I'm constantly creating, content.
Sure.
It's like, whether it's written or spoken. So, I loved it, and it's fun, but it's it's a shit. I can curse, yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
I almost said a bad word. Okay, it's a shit ton of work if you're doing it right, and it's it's top heavy as far as pay goes, and it's not glamorous like TV is glamorous because everybody knows who you are, Like TV in Philly, there's sort of like a glamour level to it. Radio, I don't think is the same. There's Pierre or my dad or there's icons. But if you're not an icon, like no offense to Jackson, but I wouldn't know. And he does a big show on a big station, but I wouldn't know, I ran into, and I'm in the industry. I don't know what he looks like. I don't have any idea. I've never seen him. That goes for a lot of the people on the air. So you don't get a lot of the benefits of that fame unless you're at a station event or something like that.
Right. Now you were saying too, you started becoming a program director, you wanted to, helping out with that. And one of your big loves is hair bands in the 80s, hair bands.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was almost taboo. Those bands were frowned upon and looked down upon and not appreciated by the few rare people like me and you at the time. And you were always trying to push for them to get airplay. How hard was that to get those bands any airplay?
Yeah, I remember. It's one of the funny things is before Sebastian Bach's before Bingham Bach Live, his first solo record came out, he did a tour and played the Troc. And
I was there.
I remember,
it was 10 people.
Yep, and dude, and I'll never forget. He sent in the encore or whatever, he sent Youth Gone Wild out to me, and for that moment, I felt like there were 1,000 people there and not the 15 people that were there. But I asked my program director if I could do an interview with Sebastian Bach, and he sort of laughed at me. And I was on late at night, so yeah, whatever, keep it to a couple minutes, but you can do it. And I ended up doing it. And then Sebastian Bach started calling every week, which was sort of awkward because I wasn't allowed to do anything with it. But it was tough. And the thing with me is that I always loved hair bands, but I always and it's hard to explain, I guess, how I feel about music. I really like every sort of music that I get that gets put in front of me. I love top 40 music. I love, because I did that in college. I love hair bands. When I started on WYSP was sort of the birth of nu metal. And I remember playing Static X and Power Man 5000 and Disturbed and loving that too. So I sort of loved, it's funny, people are taking shots at me. It's funny, when I worked at an alternative station in Chicago, I love that stuff too. I love Dashboard Confessional. I love Against Me. And, people were like, well, you're a poser. Which one do you like? Do you like this or this? And I was like, I don't know. I like every bit. I love everything. So it sort of made it easier for me because I could get into whatever we were playing. The hairband stuff was frustrating because that was right when there started to be. It was frustrating because, first of all, people always thought of whether we were playing hairbands or not, people always thought of WYSP as the hairband station. So it was, and maybe that was because of how it sort of was in the 80s with Metal Shop and all that stuff. So they thought of us as the hairband station, but we didn't have any interest in really being the hairband station. And it was frustrating for me because people were expecting us to do it. And I loved that stuff. And there was sort of a rebirth going. It was right when Poison got back together and did that big festival, that big tour with Rat and Great White that was at the Susquehanna Bank Center. And it was right when that was starting to happen again. So, it was a bummer, but I latched myself onto the new metal thing and pretty much entrenched myself in that. I loved Korn. I loved doing that stuff too. So And we only played that at night, so that sort of got to be, something that I had of my own.
Now, you had mentioned about Chicago.
Yeah.
What made you go to Chicago and leave Philly? I mean, was that a tough decision for you, or?
It wasn't. It was when you work at the same place from when you're an intern, you never really make the money you're supposed to make because you're starting from like zero. You're starting from the bottom. So
right.
Even if you get raises, like your bottom is too low. And everybody, I was working with people that I had once interned for. So, Cousin Ed had always told me, the only way that you're not the intern anymore is if you leave and come back. So to a lot of those guys, even though I felt like they respected me and I had a good relationship, I was an intern there. And what had happened as well is that Free FM had started, and I was the music director of a talk station. So my job security was pretty low. I had a good relationship with Kid Chris Show. I was on that show a lot, but I needed I think a place to grow, and I needed a place where I could work music. This alternative felt like a natural fit, and a friend of mine who worked in the record business told me about the Chicago job, told me to apply for it, and I went through sort of a really long, like 3-month interview process and got the gig. And then ended up moving out there. So the money was much, much better. The job I thought was much, much better. And I felt like I was viewed out there as sort of something better than I was viewed as in Philadelphia.
And there's the Kid Chris thing. Like, that whole thing,
yeah.
I felt when Chris was on the air here, I mean, at the time, I was delivering newspapers in the morning, so I'd be able to listen every morning. But it just felt like something special was growing. It reminded me so much of the old Stern days and how he was, like, building himself throughout the Philly market. And it was such a fun show. And when he got booted, I was blown away. And still to this day, it's like, it just seems not right.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's funny when you get wrapped up in it, and he did. He had certainly had a very passionate, like diehard following that was definitely growing. At least when I had left, when he was in afternoons, I had left. But it was funny when I got to Chicago and I played people from Chicago clips of when I was on the show. They looked at me and they were like, "So that wasn't on the radio, was it?" And I was like, "Yeah, and just looking at people's faces when they sort of heard what was going on the show, they were horrified.
Really?
And then, Philly's a different market. It's people, I guess, like that stuff better here than they do in a lot of places. And then I left and I came back, and I thought he was doing well in mornings, but I think one of the things that maybe sort of held him back was that, to get big, like you, and even Howard, I think, became like broad. You break your ground and you get those dedicated fans by being, extreme and out of the box. But
right.
You sort of, to get big, you have to sort of understand, like the bigger audience. Some of that stuff has to get toned down, And
right.
I think one of the reasons it has to get toned down is as you get bigger, more people are paying attention to what you say. So if I say something really awful and it's just us, then that's one thing. And if it's
right.
20 people, then the odds of somebody not approving of it get higher. And if it's 50, they get even higher. If it's 100, they get even higher. And it's funny, the thing that he got fired for, I actually wasn't in town that day. I was on vacation. And I got back, and they had actually played it during my show, that song. They played it during my show while I was gone. And I came back, and I heard what was going on, and I saw, like, a lot of, you work in radio long enough, you can tell when something's wrong. And there were a lot of people in closed-door meetings, and I was like, oh, no. And I was very lucky that I didn't get fired when all that stuff went down. So it was a bummer, but he's doing well now. And I talk to him occasionally, and he seems like he's having a good time. So I'm glad that it worked out for him.
One of the old friends of the Kid Chris show we've had on a few times, former flyer Riley Cote. We just had him on 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact. He's a good dude.
Yeah, he was on the show a lot. He was a friend of the show. Chris always loved Flyers. Chris is a big hockey fan. I never was, but Riley Cote was perfect for the show because he beat the crap out of people. So it made for a good friend of the show.
Now, when you were in Chicago, you had and I was describing this at the beginning of the show, I guess DJs that are in music, they always try to have that special moment where they discover a band or rediscover a band, and you kind of had that moment with Silverchair.
Yeah. Now, when I was in Chicago, I wasn't on the air, but I got to pick what was going on the air. And when I was music director, I got hired to be assistant program director and music director, and then my program director got fired, and I got to do his job. So that's when, I got to play. It wasn't just Silverchair, man. I got to play everything I always wanted. I mean, we played Hanson on an alternative station. We played a new Hanson record and didn't tell anybody what it was. And Silverchair, I remember being at my desk, and I had always especially when there's an album called Diorama that came out that I thought was just brilliant. And Daniel Johns had got really sick during the promotion of the record, and they never got to really tour the U.S. And I always thought it was such a great record. And I remember being at my desk, and they had released The Greatest View on their website. And that was the only place you could get it, was listening to it on the website. And I just I fell in love. We recorded it off the internet and started playing it right away. And we ended up booking them for a Christmas concert. And my last night in Chicago, before I moved back to Philly, was them headlining the show that I had booked them for. And awesome. I left. So yeah, it was a really, it was a special moment, I thought, be a part of, them playing a sold-out House of Blues show, and being able to sort of bring them back, being a part of bringing them back. And I thought they were such a wonderful band.
Now, what made you come back to Philly from Chicago?
Well, things in Chicago got a little weird. The company that owned them, that station's not there anymore. The company that owned them, Pm Est, was not in a great financial position, and no one really knew what was going on with the station. And at the time, WYSP had flipped back to rock, and Chris was going to be in mornings, and had reached out to me about doing middays and being assistant program director, and they offered me a lot more money than I was making. So I thought it was a cool story. I thought it was a good time. Even though I enjoyed Chicago, it was a good time to get out of there and, to be a part of helping to rebuild WYSP. I thought it would be a lot of fun, too. We got derailed for a little while there when Chris got fired, but I thought we made for my time there, 4 years or however long it was, when I came back, I thought we made a good go of it. I was proud of what we did.
So when you came back, did you have that respect like you were hoping to have coming back, where you weren't that intern no more that was on the air now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think mostly because everybody else was gone that I had worked with. Everybody was new. I was the person, of the people on the air, or of the people that worked there, I had more time, WYSP years under my belt than anybody. So I went from new guy to the guy that sort of knew everything and the lay of the land. So it had changed completely. I wish more of the people had been there than when I started, but they weren't. So but yeah, it was completely different. I went from intern to sort of. I wasn't doing mornings, but I was on right after mornings, so I was like a prime guy on the station. So it was cool.
Now, one person you mentioned, which he's just kind of disappeared, is Cousin Ed. Whatever happened to Ed?
Ed manages, or I guess he manages the Irish Pole, which is a bar on 2nd Street in Old City.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he appears... he doesn't like me very much anymore, and something must have happened when I was like gone. I mean, I didn't live on bad terms. Ed and I always had our clashes, but we left on good terms. And something must have happened in the middle there. So he doesn't like me very much anymore. But yeah, I wish he always seems happy when I see him. I'll see him like walk his daughter in Old City sometimes, and he seems happy running the bar. You know, he never wanted to leave here. So sometimes he probably could have been on the edge somewhere if he decided to go somewhere else. But he didn't. I got the sense he didn't want to leave.
Wow. So then you were back for, 4 years here at WYSP, you said, and then that's when they decided to make the switch?
Yeah, it was about 4 years. I think I came back at the end of 2008, and it happened in, I don't know, September of 2012, was it? Was it 2012 or 2011?
2011, yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, it was, I was back for 3 years. 3 or 4, 3.5 years, something like that. So, yeah.
Were you blindsided by that, or did you kind of expect it to happen?
I thought it was, I was waiting for it. And it wasn't really about WYSP. It's funny, like our ratings, when you look back at it, we weren't number one or anything, but we were doing well. But it was more about, AM, especially for a sports format, is really tough because young people don't even really know AM exists.
Right.
So the revenue opportunities for WIP were just bigger than the revenue opportunities for, like, talk radio. You can just make more money than music radio, especially if you're not like, you have to be huge in music radio to make significant money. So
really?
They needed to save IP, and I kind of had a feeling it was going to happen for about a year, and I was a little bored with WYSP anyway. I didn't want to lose my job, of course, but
sure.
It wasn't surprising, and I wasn't entirely crushed by it. The only reason that it bothered me was that the people that say, like, well, you went out because you did the same songs all the time, you went out because this, you went out because that, are usually wrong. We went out because WIP was a priority. And I don't think that was a wrong decision. I think that was the right decision. But I just didn't like that it appeared as if we lost, when I thought we had won. I thought, even considering what had happened with Chris, I thought after we hired Danny and we sort of went to the rock you grew up with and really embraced the hairband stuff, I thought we had we were making a mark, and I thought we were, making a difference to people, and people really liked us. So I'm proud of what happened. I was proud of our sign off and all that stuff. So I definitely wasn't blindsided.
Yeah, I mean, the whole sign-off you guys did, I mean, that was pretty awesome. I mean, especially with bringing back, like, Metal Shop and all the things like that. I mean, that was very fitting. It was a great tribute to everything.
Yeah, it's rare that radio stations get to do that, and it was a testament to the trust that management had in me and had in the people running the radio station, that they allowed us to really pay proper tribute, to reach out to all of those people, to reach out to Jackie the Joke Man and, anybody that had been, afternoons or more, anybody that, Pam Early, anybody that had been on the radio station, we offered them the opportunity to be on again. And it showed trust in them to say, go ahead, play whatever music you want to play, go nuts. And they knew that I wasn't going to screw them. And they knew that I was going to pay it the respect that it deserved. So, we got 2 weeks to say goodbye, and I got to do, the last show on WYSP, and that's a pretty amazing feeling to have done that.
You also got to do something that not many people can say they've done. You got to interview Howard Stern.
Yeah, I did an interview recently, and they had asked me about that, and I haven't really listened to it until recently. It was I only get, I get sentimental about WYSP, I would say, once every 3 months or something. Something happens. And I think about the last couple of weeks or think about something that happened. And I forget what happened, but somebody had reminded me of the Stern thing, and I went back and I listened to it. I remember it vividly, it wasn't a surprise totally, but we didn't get a confirmation until shortly before I talked to him. And Channel 3 was actually in the studio with me, videotaping me for the last day of WYSP when Howard ended up calling. So when I did the interview, I had a reporter in there and a TV camera, and, you know, I could see people in the hallways just sort of stopped and listening. And I had never met Howard before, spoken to him before. And he was amazing, and it was I listened back to it, and I'm very proud of that interview. I feel like he interviewed me as much as I interviewed him, but it was a really, I thought, interesting, honest conversation about radio and WYSP and all that stuff. So it was a highlight, I think, of one of the top few highlights of my career was that moment.
I tell you what, I was glued to my car radio listening to that when that happened.
Yeah.
And you can hear in Howard, like, I mean, if you listen to Howard, he always talks about his love for radio and his knowledge of radio and how he used to read all these books growing up and with his father and all. But you really heard it in that interview, his knowledge of, WYSP and the Philly market and everything, and the true love that he had for WYSP.
Yeah, and he said something really interesting toward the end, which is exactly how I felt about it. And Bruce Warren, the program director of WXP, ended up writing about it too, was that, like, Howard was like, more than anything, I missed the idea of WYSP being there. It wasn't that, we weren't the number one station in the market, but it still bothered people that we weren't going to be there because they liked the thought of it, the idea of it. It had always been there, and the idea of it not being there was upsetting. And that's sort of, I'm not getting broken up, my throat was just getting funny. I'm not like crying or anything. I would admit it to you if I was. But he was right about the idea of WYSP not being there. I thought that was a really apt thing to say. So I thought he was very, very candid, as he always is, but he was very candid in that interview.
So then after you go off the air, you're now out of work. What were you thinking, like, where do I go from here? Did you have anything set up, or did you kind of have a plan, like, to do what you're doing?
Yeah, I had a very specific plan. Like, my last year of WYSP, I'd gotten very sort of bored doing the music thing that we were doing, and I had done a lot of sports podcasting and writing, and I was having a lot of fun doing it. And I used the end of WYSP as an opportunity to sort of rebrand myself and prove that I could do something else. So I never used my last name before. And I wasn't using it for notoriety. What I was using it for was just like, you can't be a one-name guy on a sports station. Like you need a full name. Like, you have to sort of embrace who you are.
Right.
So, like, that's why I thought it was important that my website be spikeeskin.com and, not any funny name. It was my name. I wanted everything to be about, like, this is who I am, and sort of redefining and rebranding who I was. And I sort of used my unemployment pay as, like, I pretended it was my salary to do what I was doing, to podcast, to write. And I did it, and I ended up convincing CBS that they needed to add somebody like me who could do radio and write and do TV and report and do talk shows and sort of tie all of their properties together. And I eventually convinced them. I had one opportunity in the middle there to do a music type thing, but in the end, I thought this provided the best opportunity for me.
Now, you've done radio, you've done podcasting, TV, but more so with radio and podcasting. Do you think podcasting is going to be the future of radio? I mean, we have satellite radio, but do you think that's going to be more the future of radio today?
I don't. I think by and large, people just want to listen to things that they like listening to, and I think what podcasting does is it gives more people the opportunity to do it, but I don't know that, like, if you have a great radio show and an average podcast, people will listen to the great radio show. But if you have a great podcast, people will listen to your podcast. So I think what it does do, I think the part of podcasting that's the future is or at least the current, is the idea of being able to listen whenever you want to. It's on demand, and that's the great thing about it. I think the mistake that a lot of podcasts make is they're doing let's just call podcasting doing a form of radio. Let's just say that talking, broadcasting, let's just call it broadcasting. So people get into podcasts and think, well, wow, if I turn on the mic and yap for a half an hour, well, that's entertaining. That's not entertaining. To do this show, you have to prepare for it. You have to know what you're talking about when you're talking about it. And if you approach a podcast in that sort of same way that you approach a radio show, then you'll have a good podcast. But if you just turn on the mic and BS for an hour, well, your buddies are going to like it, and you might have some people that stumble onto your show because you're talking about a topic that they like, but you're not going to really build that sort of fan base that you need to build. So I podcast 2 or 3 times a week now just to keep myself sharp. And I don't do it the same way I do a radio show. It's a little bit looser. You don't have to, when you're on the radio, if I was interviewing you, every 3 minutes or 4 minutes or so, I would have to say, we have Bay on, and here's who he is, and here's why I'm talking to him. Just sort of because somebody could accidentally turn on the radio station and they don't know who you're talking to. If they talk to you if they're listening to a podcast, they know who it is. They downloaded it. They can look at it on their screen. So that part of it is different. It's a little looser, but I still approach it with the same sort of vigor and preparedness that I approach a radio show with.
Yeah, we do this once a week, and we're a 3-hour show. We started out as an hour and went to 2 and now 3. And I tell people, it takes me the other 6 days just to get prepared for one day. So I don't know, guys like you guys who are truly in the business and we're doing 5 days a week, it's a lot of work, and people don't realize it.
Yeah, it's a lot of mental work. It's just a strain. It's not physically demanding, but you get home at the end of the day, you're sort of spent because you've been thinking so hard. You can't at a job where you don't do that, you can spend a day even not really focusing. But when all you have is your voice, and all you have is your thoughts, and if you stop, then the radio stops. Well, yeah, you're in trouble. So it's I'm not making it out to be rocket science, but when I'm on the air from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., I'm like you. I'll spend the 3-4 days prior sort of formulating and remember, the thing that sucks is that I could spend 3 or 4 days lining up guests and sort of formulating what I want to talk about. But if, Juan Castillo gets fired that day, well, then everything that I was going to talk about is gone,
Right.
And you sort of, you have to reset what you're talking about. So, I'll spend the 3 or 4 days thinking about it before I lead up to it. And then, I'll be at the radio station 3 hours beforehand, just sort of mapping out how I want the show to go. So yeah, it's not, everybody thinks it's you walk in there, say Michael Vick, all 12 lines light up, and you take calls for 4 hours. There are some days that you can do that, but it doesn't make for a very good show.
So, all right, since you brought it up, let's talk some sports now. Since this is the new Spike Eskin, you're in the world of sports now. Michael Vick, do you think he's a different person this year?
No, I've always, since he's come back, I've always thought he's been I've never for 1 second questioned how hard he works or his desire to be great, and he's always been very kind and genuine and straightforward when I've spoken to him or heard him interviewed. So since he's been back, putting aside what he did, which was, awful, but he's been, a very dedicated player. I think this year, I think the offense that he's in really suits him, but I think that one of his best traits is how badly he wants to win and how he goes all out every play. But that's sort of, I think, will end up being his downfall. I don't think he knows how to, dial it back. And I can't imagine him at 33 and as small as he is, and he's not a very big guy at 33, just staying healthy, I think that will ultimately be the problem.
He just seems, maybe it's just me, but the past few years he's been here in town, he just had kind of like a smug attitude in interviews. Even that one commercial he does for whatever that airline is, the JetBlue or whatever it is, it just seems very smug. And this year his whole demeanor just seems very happy and upbeat. He just seems like a different person to me this year. I don't know.
I think if you look at the first 2 years he was here, I don't think you would have thought that about his attitude. And then, especially when things were going great that 1 year, he was all smiles. But then those 2 years were shitty for everyone, and you go from Atlanta is a horrible sports town. And when you suck, they just ignore you. When you suck here, it's every day, like, why are you fumbling? 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 And, eventually it's like, well, I'm not trying to fumble, and I think he sort of just got drugged down by it. It's no excuse, but he may have been curt or, aloof, but I don't smug, I understand why you would say that, but I think it's a misreading of how he was. I think he was just unhappy.
How about the Charlie Manuel firing and bringing up Sandberg?
Well, he wasn't going to be there next year. I think it's interesting because all people did was complain about Charlie mismanaging the team until they fired him, and then it was like, oh, poor Charlie. And he's a very nice man, and I thought that, he certainly was the most to blame for what he did, for how bad they were. But, they weren't bringing him back. He knew they weren't bringing him back. And I think and I think the team knew they weren't bringing him back, and it was starting to affect the team, I thought. And it was affecting him, and it was just, to me, it seemed like sort of a mercy killing, and I thought Amaro ended up taking such a huge hit, deservedly so, but all Charlie was going to get bullets the rest of that year. Everybody acts like there's going to be like some magical history tour where he would wave and say goodbye. Like, they were going to continue to suck, and people were going to continue to wonder what he was doing. So I think they did him a favor, and he got to ride out on the white horse like a hero,
And your beloved Sixers. You've been waving the flag for the Sixers for years.
Yeah, I'm more happy with them than I've been since I've been home. The guy in charge, Sam Hinkie, knows what he's doing, and he's there's only two places that you want to be in the NBA. You want to be at the bottom, planning to get to the top, or you want to be at the top. And anywhere in the middle, you're preventing yourself from getting to the top. So he's done a great. I think the best thing that you can look at that he's done is that there's a couple different ways to be bad. You can be bad by getting a bunch of bad players. Anyone can go acquire a bunch of bad players and be bad. But what he's done is that, like, every player on the team is now, like, aside from Kwame Brown, everybody's 25 years or younger. So if somebody's not good, like, they still have an opportunity. They went and acquired a bunch of guys a bunch of former first-round picks who haven't quite worked out somewhere, and they're giving them another chance. And they hired a bunch of developmental coaches. And out of this year, if you bring in all those guys, you bring in like 6 different former first-round picks. If after this year you can find a gem out of one of those, and that's not that high a percentage, find a gem out of one of those, and Michael Carter-Williams and Nerlens Noel work out, and you still are terrible and end up with 2 great draft picks next year, well, then I think you're in good shape. So I am fully in favor of what they've done.
What do you think about them buying the Jersey Devils?
I don't give a shit. I don't care. look, I know Flyers fans are all tweaked about it, but Flyers fans don't like the Sixers anyway. So, like all Flyers fans do is rip the Sixers and talk about how nobody shows up to games. So I have a hard time feeling bad for them that the Sixers owner owns the Devils. The Sixers owner is a very smart guy. Josh Harris is a smart guy and a rich guy for a reason. And I think what he understands, and from what I understand from talking to people within the organization, is that his position is this, is that once we turn this around and we're winning, nobody will remember that we bought the Devils. And I think that's the truth. I think, if this team is good, I don't think anybody who goes to buy a ticket that wants to see a great basketball game is going to be like, well, Josh Harris owns the Devils. I just don't think they're going to care,
Right, right.
So it doesn't bother me. And it gives me an opportunity to tweak Flyers fans by acting like I'm a Devils fan now. So I'll do that for the next few years and torture them. So.
Well, actually, I do have a co-host, and he's sitting there silent, Frank. Frank, any sports questions you want to ask Spike before we let him go? Did you fall in the toilet, Frank? Did you fall off the phone?
Did I bore Frank?
Oh, well, I guess Frank fell off the air. Or he fell in the toilet. Or his phone.
Sorry about that. For some reason, my phone was acting up. No, I actually tried to cut in a couple times, and I couldn't. The wonders of telephones here.
There you go. Well, the floor is yours, Frank.
Well, I guess the only question I had is, and you kind of touched on this with the Sixers buying the Jersey Devils. Do you think at any point that the plan is to move either team to some place where it might be a little more, I guess, where they can get a better deal? Or do you think that even moving the Sixers to Jersey, where they now have the rights to the arena, is a possibility?
No, I don't. I just think, I think they'll threaten it at some point, but I think they'll threaten it because they're going to want a building. They're in a bad building deal with Comcast, and they won't say it out loud, but Comcast owned the team before, so the building deal didn't matter. They own the building and they own the team. But now, a lot of the money in owning a sports franchise, especially, and the value of basketball franchises is skyrocketing. I mean, the Warriors were just valued at $800 million. The Kings just sold for $530 million. And here you have the Sixers, who are in the fourth largest market in the country, and they paid $240 for them. So it's already worth twice what he paid. And part of that is because of where it is. So, it's a big city, and a big city who, when the team has been good, when Iverson was here, they were, for 2 years, they were number one and number two as far as attendance goes. So, you move them to Newark, nobody fills that building either, and you're competing directly with the Knicks and the Nets, and you're always going to be third. Here, you can at least be first, So, but I think what will happen is they will eventually, it gives them leverage. Having both teams gives them leverage for both places. So I think they will use it as leverage at some point. I think at some point in the next 5 years, they will, because you're going to see in the next couple of years, they're going to build a giant practice facility in the Navy Yard for the Sixers. You don't go and spend however much they're going to spend, $5 million, $10 million on a practice facility if you're going to leave. So I don't think it's I don't think it makes enough sense, but I think they'll threaten it at some point, and they'll threaten it to get a basketball-only facility, and I think they'll get it, even though, people will say, well, why do you need a new arena? Well, at that point, Wells Fargo Center will be almost 30 years old, and that's sort of when you start moving. That's, when they built the Wells Fargo Center was when the Spectrum was 30 years old, So maybe in the next 5 to 7 years, I think it'll happen.
Speaking of buildings, wasn't the original plan, when they knocked the Spectrum down, weren't they supposed to put a hotel there as well?
Well, no. I mean, honestly, Xfinity was called Philly Live at one point. I guess that was what the plan was for it, and they lost funding and so on and so forth. So they had at one point, they had a very giant idea of what Xfinity Live was going to be, and I think a hotel may have been in the plans. But I think, building up that area even more in general was part of the plan, and I don't know that that's. I just don't know that it's realistic. I don't know how, I just think the amount of infrastructure that it would take to make that area like a hangout area, it's so far from a hangout area. It's like, it's not, there's nothing on the streets down there. There's nothing to walk to. So I don't know that you can build enough to make it worth it. Now, maybe if they get the Olympics, something like that, then that might be a reason to put a hotel there. But I don't know that there's a reason right now.
It just irks me that they. I love the beloved Spectrum, and it just irks me to see that there's no Spectrum there, and they just open the Xfinity Live in the corner, and there's nothing there in the Spectrum anymore.
They knocked down the Spectrum and put it in a bar. Essentially, it's what they did.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It just don't make sense to me. Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this. This has been a lot of fun, a lot of questions answered, a lot of memories shared, and and one thing I got to say too is, it was probably 5-6 years after knowing you that I even realized who your father was. It was really, that's your dad? I never knew that, and then I guess probably you said Spike Eskin on the air one day, and I was like, what? How'd that happen? As a matter of fact, how did you get the name Spike?
I was in college, and I was on a college radio station, and at the time I did two different things. I did sports on Saturday mornings, and then I started doing music shifts. And my college program director, in his infinite wisdom, told me that I couldn't use the same name when I was doing music and when I was doing sports, which I thought was weird and hilarious, whatever. And I didn't have a nickname except for, at the time, my hair was bleached and spiky, and where I got my hair done, the receptionist used to write me in as Spike, and probably because she never remembered my name, and used to draw a picture that when I signed an autograph, I used to draw that picture. Yeah, so that's what I used, and I actually just started noticing that people, it stuck, people remember Spike. That is a name, that's my real name, but it goes in one ear, out the other, but Spike never went in one ear and out the other. So it stuck, and I just stopped using any last name at all, just because I didn't want the association with not that I'm not proud of my dad, but I wanted people to sort of judge me for my own, and I didn't use, even when I was program director in Chicago, I didn't use my last name. I had business cards that just said Spike on them. It wasn't until the last 2 years that I've even used my last name.
Did you think about dropping Spike at all now with going into the sports world? And
somebody mentioned it within CBS, but it got shot down rather quickly. Part of what makes me, I think, an attractive person to have on your air staff or whatever is that I have, some goodwill built up in town. I've been on the air in Philadelphia in one way or another since I was 22, and I'm 37 now. So it's 15 years of Spike in the area, and it doesn't, I'm not, Howard Stern or Pierre Robert or Angelo Cataldi or Howard Eskin or anything, but I think people have a sort of a sense of who I am now. So I didn't want to let that go. It is funny being on KYW's radio and saying Spike Eskin. It feels silly sometimes, but losing the name, I thought, would have been flushing, 15 years of work in the market down the toilet, and I didn't want to do that.
Very interesting. Well, Spike, thank you so much, and go to SpikeEskin.com, and you can check him out on Facebook at Spike Eskin and Twitter at Spike Eskin. Just Google him. You'll find him everywhere.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to plug?
No, that's all, man. You got it all. I appreciate the time, man. Thanks for asking me to do it.
Oh, dude, it's been fun. Come on again, please. Talk more sports.
Yeah, of course, whenever you need me.
You're the man. Dude, thanks so much again, and I'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, Seth.
Thanks, man. There you go, everybody. Spike Eskin, who's slowly becoming a legend in the Philadelphia area, whether it was from music from WYSP, now on 94 WIP. That was something I wanted to ask him, too. How many times did you almost say 94 WYSP?
You know what I've always wondered? And, of course, now that we hang up, I think of this. Did he ever do a show with his father?
You know what? I think they have done like a couple shows here and there, yeah. Not like a steady show, but you know what I mean? Like some one-off shows they've done.
Because that would be, in my opinion, that would be interesting to hear a father and son fighting over sports. You know, if they agree, they disagree. It could actually be a real fun show, you know.